Hey, well, today I just wanted to briefly review a book that I read. It is Nicholas Sparks' The Wish. I took off the dust jacket, so because it was like getting in the way. Well, I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars, and I know it's kind of low, and I'll explain why. Nicholas Sparks, of course, is a great writer. He's really, really very talented, and I used to love his books. Like I used to read them all the time. But then I stopped over the years, and I'll explain why later. Um, but one thing that he really did great in this book, which he always does well with, are the visuals. Like he really pulls you into a scene when you're reading it. Um, he lets you see everything through the main character's eyes, so that what they're looking at connects with their emotions, and it makes you feel like you're not just with the main character, but you are the main character, and you're feeling what they feel while you're looking at what they're seeing. So he does great with that. An example of that is on page 146 of the book. And while I'm turning there, I'll tell you kind of like what it's about. It's about this girl named Maggie Dawes. Um, she she's like retelling her part of a section of her life, a snippet of her life from when she was a teenager to someone else. So it's like she's retelling part of her life story. Um, so part of it is like, I don't know, do you call it omniscient? I don't know. Part of it's in first person where she's using words like I and me, and that's the part where she's a teenager, because her future self is retelling the story of her teenage self's life to someone else. I made that way too complicated. But anyway, here's like a great example of how Nicholas Sparks uses visuals and pulls readers into scenes. On page 146, it says, and Maggie is in the car or in a truck. She is riding alongside a boy that she likes in a truck. It says, we drove along dark and quiet roads, past farmhouses and mobile homes decked out in Christmas lights. One small town gave way to the next. I could feel Bryce's leg pressed against my own, and when he laughed at something one of the twins had said, I thought about the easy way he seemed to relate to his family. His mom, probably thinking that I might be feeling left out, asked the kinds of questions that parents always asked. And even though I was happy to answer in a general way, I still wondered how much Bryce had told them about me beforehand. And then there's a little, like a better one. One page, a couple pages over on page 148. She's describing like a Christmas scene. And it says, while houses decked out in Christmas lights were common in Seattle and the malls were decorated professionally, this was on an entirely different scale, with the holiday display spread over at least 3 acres. Off to my left sat a small house at the edge of the property with lights framing the windows and lining the roof, a Santa and sleigh perched near the chimney. But it was the remainder of the grounds that amazed me. Even from the highway, I could see scores of illuminated Christmas trees, a giant American flag glowing high in the treetops, tall teepee like cones assembled only with lights, a frozen pond with a clear plastic surface, lit from below by tiny brilliant bulbs, a decorated train, and synchronized lights, making it appear as if reindeer were flying through the sky. And it goes on. Um, but I just like the way he describes in detail, like visuals in detail, and connects them with the main character's emotions. Another thing he really did well with was address the reality of serious illness. Like some books, even though the illness is a big part of the main character's life, some books will kind of shy away from talking about the real pain that is associated with illness. But Nicholas Sparks does not do that. He gets right into it and makes you like cringe. Like I was cringing and going, oh my goodness, when I was reading some of the parts um, that describe Maggie's illness because she's sick in this book. As an adult, she's sick. Like, for example, just briefly on page 268, she's out with a friend. Like, she's out just trying to be normal even though she's sick. And this is what happens. It says, after finishing their teas, they stepped outside into the chilly air, and Maggie felt a sharp pain deep in her chest, one that continued to flare with every heartbeat. It was blinding white. Knives, not needles, worse than ever. She froze, closing her eyes and pressing hard with a fist right below her breast. With a free hand, she gripped Mark's arm and his eyes went wide. Are you okay? She tried to breathe steadily, the pain continuing to flash and burn. She felt Mark's arm wrap around her. It hurts, she rasped out. Do you need to go back inside and sit, or should I take you home? With clenched teeth, she shook her head. The thought of moving at all seemed impossible, and she concentrated on her breathing. She didn't know if that would do any good, but it was what Gwen had told her to do when she was suffering through the agony of labor. Okay. And then eventually the pain passes of that scene. But there are a lot of scenes like that where it's even more descriptive of what she's feeling when she's in the grips of her serious illness. So I like that it addressed that like head on. However, speaking of addressing pain, this is where we get into why I only gave the book 2 out of 5 stars. And really, who cares what I think? I'm just one person. I'm sure lots of people probably liked it. That's why Nicholas Sparks is famous and popular. I'm just one idiot who doesn't like most of his books anymore. But anyway, this is, speaking of pain, what he seems, in my opinion, to fail to address in a correct way is the pain associated with pregnancy and labor. Because when Maggie is very young, she is pregnant. That's a main theme in the book, so I'm not like giving away a huge detail. She gets pregnant as a teenager. And let's see what she says. I think she's about like 2 months in or something like that into her pregnancy at this point. Page 151. Here's what the young pregnant girl says. It struck me that in the last couple of days, I hadn't thought about my pregnancy much at all. In fact, that is a tone of the book. She just kind of glosses through things like pregnancy. Now, we compare that with what experts say. Like, there's this website called PlannedParenthood.com that talks about what most women experience when they're about 2 months into their pregnancy. It says they commonly experience breast tenderness, constipation, extreme fatigue, worsening vomiting, and nausea. Those are things that you can't ignore. It's not easy to, I wouldn't imagine, I haven't been pregnant, but I would not imagine, based on my friends who've been pregnant and from like what experts say, that most women, especially if you're a teenager, would just forget that they're pregnant because they have a crush on a boy. No, I don't think that's accurate. And that might not seem like a big deal, but it's just that sort of depiction of a female going through pregnancy is carried out throughout this book. Like, for example, on page 342, when we get back into the future, where adult Maggie is retelling her experience with her, when she was a teenager, she was pregnant. At one point, not on this page, but at one point, I recall her saying, "Oh, I can't even really remember labor. It was so long ago." I have never heard a woman who's been in labor say, "I can't remember what it felt like." I've never heard that. And then this part on page 342, her friend asks her, "Did the contractions hurt?" "It was like a baby dinosaur chomping through my uterus." So she admits there was pain. He laughed, and we got to the hospital, and I was checked into a room on the maternity floor. The doctor came by, and both my aunt and Gwen stayed with me for the next 6 hours until I was finally dilated. Gwen had me concentrate on breathing. My aunt brought me ice chips, all the usual things, I guess. Sometime around 1 a.m. or so, I was ready to deliver. The next thing I knew, nurses were getting things ready and the doctor came in, and 3 or 4 pushes later, it was all over. That doesn't sound bad. You forgot the munching baby dinosaur. Every single contraction was agonizing. It had been, even if she could no longer remember the exact sensation. Okay, so that's what I was thinking of, the part where it said she couldn't really remember what it felt like. That part was, I guess that's what that was. But anyways, even though it does, like, she does admit that it hurt and everything, I've just, in my conversations with friends who've been pregnant, they've never spoken about it that way. They don't tell me about, someone brought me ice chips and then I went through the contractions and it was really, like, they don't gloss over it. They're like, it was terrible. And I looked it up online just to see what a couple of like real mothers who've been through labor had to say about it. And on parents.com, there's a quote from one woman who says, what did she say? No, this is babycenter.com. One woman said, I felt like I was being run over by a train. And then another woman on that same website said, I begged my hubby to throw me out of the car on the way to the hospital. It hurt so bad. And then parents.com that says, while the experience is different for everyone, labor usually feels like extremely strong menstrual cramps that take your breath away and make you unable to talk. Now, menstrual cramps, even when they're not extreme, are horrible. When they are extreme, I know personally, I'm like throwing up and crying. Sorry if that's TMI, but that's just the reality of it. It's horrible. It's like being tortured for a little while. Your own body's torturing you. So if that's what you're going through for hours of labor, except it gets worse and worse and worse as the hours go on, I can't even imagine that. But that is not addressed in the book. And this brings me to my next point, like the overall reason why I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars. It's because while I admire, and I think it is very commendable for writers to step outside of their gender and their culture to empathize with main characters who are different gender from them or a different culture, that's great. But it must, you got to do the research. Like, for example, in this book, it's an adult male. Nicholas Sparks is an older adult man writing about some major life experiences that are specific to women from the perspective of a teenage girl. And I feel like a lot of what should be emphasized is glossed over, and it's simply because he doesn't realize that. Just like there are things that happen to men that are hugely important to them that I just would never know about because I never experienced that because I have a different body. I'm a woman, so I just don't experience what they experience. So if I'm going to write about a guy going through that, I need to talk to men and ask them, like, how did you feel? How did this affect your life? Like, really do my research before I write about that particular situation from the perspective of a man. And this is really important because of where women are in society. We're often looked down on. Like, I remember I used to work, what I'm trying to say is our experiences often are minimized, as if when we recount them, we're exaggerating. For example, I used to work with a young man who I really liked. We got along really well. He was great. But I remember one time we were talking about labor or pregnancy. I don't know why. And he said something like, labor's no big deal. Women have been doing it for centuries. I'm sure it's fine. It's not that bad. I just looked at him because I thought he was joking at first, but he was serious. And it's because he was a young man. He didn't have like a whole lot of experience with women. And I'm sure he hadn't like sat around watching, birth videos or anything. So he just didn't know. And that's okay. How would he know? He wouldn't know that unless he did like research on what it's like to be pregnant and what it's like to go through labor. So the same thing for it's just really important when a male author is writing from the perspective of a female, which is great. They should do that. We all should do that. But to do the research so that a woman's experiences are not minimized, which is what society already does to us. They already tell us we're exaggerating or insinuate that because we live in a male-dominated culture. So this book seems to further that male-dominated culture because I feel like Mr. Sparks did not do enough research. And another point to add to why I say that is because, for example, like in The Wish, this book, Maggie retells her very first sexual encounter. It happened when she was 15. And that's what caused her to be pregnant. First time, got pregnant. And yet, that sexual encounter, it's like maybe 2 paragraphs, short paragraphs. And then the follow up with the boy when she tells him, hey, I think I'm pregnant with your kid. Or she's trying to tell him or about to. It's like 2.5 pages, but it's very brief. And it's very cold, emotionless. And that's just not realistic. For most girls, that moment, first of all, even if there is no pregnancy, the first time is a key moment that impacts the way she views herself for a very long time, the way she views the opposite sex, if her first sexual encounter was with someone of the opposite sex. It impacts her view of that, impacts her view of how she relates to the opposite sex, how she relates to society, her self-esteem. It's a really, really big deal and a poignant moment. And it's something that most girls are gonna think about for a long time in detail. And if that moment, that sexual encounter, is what gets her pregnant, that's gonna be even more of like a central thought in her brain. She's going to be going over that over and over again in her head. This book, it does not depict that at all. It mostly talks about the boy that she has a crush on while she's pregnant and how disconnected from her parents she feels and how guilty she feels. Which it's so unrealistic to me. That's not what that would be part of my concerns if that happened to me, but not the central thrust of my thoughts. So yeah, I just feel like I felt like I couldn't relate to the character because she did not feel realistic to me. She felt like she was contrived by a man who doesn't understand women. Also, there were other things, like little things that showed a lack of understanding or a lack of the author being able to relate to a teenage girl. Maggie kept referring to her boobs as her bust. I'm in my 30s. I have never called my boobs my bust. I've never heard any woman under the age of 60 refer to her chest area as her bust. That's ridiculous. Yeah. And it also went hand in hand with another, what I felt like was a glaring error in the book is the dialogue between teenagers in the book. It's very stiff and formal. It's almost, at one point I was like, am I reading a Jane Austen book? Which would be way better than this. But it's just formal language is cool for Jane Austen's era. It would be cool for adults who are like my age and maybe just getting to know each other. But in this book, it's just silly to see teenagers, I don't know, speaking politicians who are debating legislation or something. It's just weird. Nobody speaks that way. So Yeah, I was just really disappointed, and I kind of expected to be disappointed. So maybe I will, to give Mr. Sparks the benefit of the doubt, it could be that I went into reading this with a negative opinion, and I just like proved myself right. But I do feel like the theme of the book is very similar to most of his books. It seems like Mr. Sparks likes to write about seemingly helpless women who are saved by a perfect and powerful man. And usually everybody's white, also. That's the thing. And this book was no different. It was a seemingly helpless girl who constantly referred to herself as dumb, who was rescued by powerful men who were very intelligent throughout the book. So it was just really demeaning to me, and I didn't like it. But I do think that Nicholas Sparks is a very talented writer. Okay, do you feel differently about the book? If so, please feel free to leave a comment. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.